Hey guys, and welcome to part 4 of customizing THF Hyper Magnum. Today we're going to sort out his face. Now, instead of using a paint pen or a Sharpie or an airbrush or a spray can, I'm actually going to hand paint this piece because it's a lot easier to get into that fine area. I'm going to use surface primer to help the paint stick to the throat, and also I'm going to use some airbrush thinner too because I'm thinking about panel lining his eyes, and last of all a very tiny brush that won't even get into focus. Now you're going to have to take my word on this. I did all of this myself and the footage corrupted. Grimlock wasn't filming, so I can't blame it on him, it's entirely my fault, but this is what the finished product looks like. I've painted the throat just using the primer, and then I thinned it, and using the capillary action I've just dabbed paint into the eyes and then cleaned it up with some rubbing alcohol afterwards, and already you can see his face has just got so much more depth. It looks a lot more meaningful, it looks a lot more expressive. Even though it's just a tiny part of the customization, I feel that it's really helped add the most life to him. Moving on swiftly to the shoulder stacks, I've got my side cutters to get rid of those nasty nub marks and some 600 grit sanding sponge to go over and make sure that nothing nasty's left behind. And that is it. That tiny little piece there, it was annoying me, it had to come off. I mean, is it really too much to ask for Toy House Factory to cut those bits? Maybe so. And I have to say, I deliberately purchased this version instead of the Takara one because the joints are a lot stiffer, and also the back of the figure has a folding flap, so it just looks a lot cleaner overall in my opinion. If anything, it seems like an improvement on the original Takara release. Now, if it's boring watching this sanding, I just want you to take a moment and imagine how much more boring it is when you're doing it. And I've got to say, when it comes to customizing figures, sanding is always the longest part because you're taking off such small amounts of material, you're going for a fine finish, you're always checking your work because you're at the risk of taking off too much material from the figure. And as I always say, you can always take material off, but you can never put it back on. Well, actually, you can put it back on with putty, but that takes forever. Now, you can't see this on camera, but it's starting to look pretty good. Take my word for it. And I think we can leave it there. I'll get the other side done off camera to save your eyes from more sanding. Or so you thought, because now we are sanding his ear pimple with the same 600 grit sanding sponge from Tamiya. And if you thought my camera work was awful before with focusing, you ain't seen nothing yet. Check this out. Towards the bottom right of the screen, you'll notice a smudge. That's on the camera lens, and I didn't even notice. Pimple popped, we can move on to his chest. Even though I am a fan of the translucent pieces often found in these masterpiece style figures, I have to say, I don't like the opacity of them. Sometimes they're just far too see-through, and while I'd like to retain some of that, I just want to be able to tone it down a little bit. And in the past I've painted the insides of the plastic, but my good friend from Encounters of the Nerd kind gave me a great tip. Just put some paper in. I've opted for a light blue post-it note so that it's not too dark, and it really is as simple as just pushing it in, having a look to make sure all the areas are covered, and that's it. Depending on your preference, this can be a really quick and easy customization win. I'm aware that he needs a car wash. Leave me alone, please. This sticker's got to come off. I mean, Magnus has got room for a proper insignia there. And even though I'm aware in the animation that his insignia was just red printed on top of blue, I don't think that stands out very well. So taking a cue from Takara, we're going to paint that section white and pop a decal over it. First of all, I want to clean the area with my usual tactic of rubbing alcohol and microfiber cloth. We're going to be painting this race section, so I really don't want any dirt or grease or cloth to get trapped in there, hence no kitchen towels. And I've got to say, it's looking quite shiny. Next, to tape up the area that we do not want to get covered in paint. No surprises for guessing who the manufacturer of this tape is. That's right, once again, to the rescue, it's Tamiya. I think this is the 8mm tape. These aren't that expensive and I find they work really well for sticking to plastics, and they're really easy to work with in corners and grooves. So I'm not using anything special, I'm just using my hands to feel out the edges and make sure that I'm not leaving any gaps for the paint to get into. Depending on how complex the area is that you're masking, you might need to go at it from many different angles. I'm just going for whatever the straightest lines are first and using my nail to push in around the detail. Then afterwards, as I see more bits that haven't been covered, I can go back over and just do those little bits using less tape. You remember when I said that sanding was probably the most boring part? I've got to say, masking comes close on the podium. So this has got the silver medal for not only most boring thing to do, but equally most boring thing to watch. Now you're probably wondering why I didn't cut this whole masking section out of the video, and the reason is that if I must suffer, you must suffer along with me. Now, to mask up the rest of the figure, I've got two options. I can stick the whole thing in a plastic bag and just cut out the area I want to paint, or I can go expert mode and dismantle the figure. But before I dig myself a hole that I can't get out of, I want to inspect the figure and get a feel for where all of the screws, joints and pins are, to ascertain whether this is going to be easier than just putting a bag over Magnus. Now in that section I can see two screws, which is going to easily help me get this Dalsim arm off him, and the hope is that with a few more screws I can get that shoulder piece off. And in the next episode I'll be regretting my life choices. So thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.